Hi folks, good afternoon. My name is Michael O'Reilly. I'm a software architect working in Intel at the moment, actually, for the next couple of weeks, and then I leave. But I didn't know that when I submitted. But I work in the NEX group, which is the network and edge group in Intel. So we're a kind of mix of IoTG devices and networking, kind of specifically geared towards telco. This is a bit of a kind of story of the kind of journey that we undertook on a particular project called Userspace CNI. And we used it as a kind of sample repo to kind of bring it up to a particular security standard, or use it as a kind of a role modeling tool for kind of best practices for security. And the repo URL is there. And just kind of background on Userspace CNI, for people who are familiar with Kubernetes, you know, every pod has an ETH0 in it, but that's kernel networking. So this is Userspace networking, a Userspace networking stack. In this case, DPDK and VPP, and they're high performance networking stacks that are used by telco, you know, usually by telco, where they need high performance and reliable, you know, performance. So this project started a couple of years ago. It was a kind of meeting of kind of two similar projects, one by Intel and one by Red Hat. And they combined the code base into one release. And over the years, it had become unmaintained, and it was actually an ingredient in some other products we were releasing, and it would no longer build. It got to the point it would no longer build because it had been unmaintained for quite some time. So we decided, in the process of getting it working again, we would take the opportunity to use it as a kind of test bed for improving our security practices in open source. So I take a screen grab of this score because I'm afraid it'll go down. so it's currently sitting at 9.4, but yeah, if you don't keep it maintained, it will drift downwards. So it is currently still sitting at 9.4, and I think that's, you know, pretty high across the repos that we've kind of looked at within Intel. So for people who are familiar with the scorecard, you know, the scorecard is broken down into a number of different categories, but in terms of the project and our kind of aim, they don't quite match up with the way the scorecard has the different scores categorized. So in terms of this project, these items in red were must have. You must have these scored as a 10 before you can actually do a release. And obviously we do have them scored as a 10. And in terms of effort to get these to a 10, the first two were pretty easy because of the content in the actual repo, right? We didn't have any tokens to worry about in the repo, and we didn't have any workflows to begin with. So any of the workflows that we added, we ensured that they passed this test. The main one in this red category is vulnerabilities, right? And because this repo there isn't a huge amount of code in it, this isn't too hard to manage, but we do have dependabot enabled to make sure that we're on top of any vulnerabilities and keep our components updated constantly. The second category, the way these are categorized, they will become red at a point in the future. So right now, it's not a major big deal if you don't score a 10 on them or meet the target score. But at some point, you won't be allowed to do a release, unless you do meet all of the required scores. And the one that stands out there is probably branch protection. We did have branch protection turned on and scoring fully, but it became a bit of a pain to maintain the repo with everything enabled to get that score up to an 8. So at the moment, branch protection is not quite enabled the way the scorecard would want it to be, yeah, that's something kind of we've looked at a couple of times, and it's just kind of too difficult in terms of the amount of maintenance we want to do to this repo to have branch protection fully turned on. This last category are ones that they're kind of low priority, right? Nice to haves. And in terms of the effort for some of them, it's quite high. Specifically, that best practices badge. It is self-attested, but there's quite a lot of work to get that badge. And I'm not quite sure what it adds beyond kind of adding kind of knowledge to your organization of best practices. Yeah, the rest of them are pretty much standard for anything that we're working on. And we don't have any pin dependencies. We don't use pip or Node.js in this repo, so it's pretty easy to get through. These last ones are not considered by us, or at least they're kind of not included in the must-haves for releases. Now we do fuzzing, and obviously the repo is maintained. So in terms of our initial score, unfortunately we didn't kind of keep track of where we started off on this repo, but I think it was about a 3 or a 4. But there was some immediate kind of changes that we could make to bump up the score on the repo. And just adding a license file and a security file will get you a score for that. The number of contributors as well. You know, for open source projects, it should be relatively easy to get 6 contributors for that one on the scorecard. And then, you know, you need to be doing commits. As soon as you turn on dependabot, you definitely will be doing commits, and you're going to meet that criteria. This project again was kind of strange the way it happened. As I said, it was a project between Intel and Red Hat, and somebody had pushed a binary into a bin directory, which we had to delete. There's no binaries in this repo, so you go off and build it yourself. So all it took was a delete to get that score. And then probably the last kind of thing in terms of low-hanging fruit was to run step security on our repo and apply the changes. It's an incredible tool in terms of what they give you. Run it on your repo, it'll produce a PR, and if you merge that PR, it'll immediately bring your score up. So this is just a kind of screen grab I took. You basically go to their website, put in your repo. You do have to give it permissions to be able to go off and analyze your repository, and it'll then produce a pull request. Now, unfortunately, the one that I have here in this screen grab, we had applied, 99% of the recommendations from it, so there wasn't much for it to show. But initially, there was quite a lot of work, or quite a lot of recommendations from step security. And again, that really helped in terms of boosting the security of the repo. Yeah, I guess I kind of have spoken about these already, right? The main kind of thing that we did in terms of using this as a kind of a tool for other developers to go off and copy was go off and copy our workflow templates from the directory and go and apply them to your own repository. Dead easy to do, right? You just go into set up a workflow directory in your GitHub repository, and you can copy the YAML files from our repo, and they're kept up to date with dependabot, so they're always the latest. Yeah. The other item probably of note there with dependabot was it's not it's a very useful tool, but it doesn't eliminate the need for somebody to go off and maintain the repo. It can't do everything by itself. Yeah, I've kind of spoken about those. So yeah, just in terms of the security overview of the repo, we have everything enabled. In terms of this particular repo, there are some kind of false positives that it gives us, because some of this code is generated on the VPP side. There's some code generation that goes on, so it kind of reports some errors. It's not quite able to do everything, but that's again quite probably unique to this repo. And again, if you're going to implement dependabot, you're definitely going to need CI. Otherwise, you're going to have quite a job on your hands reviewing and merging PRs. This repo is quite difficult to implement CI on, because for user space networking, you need to enable huge pages, and huge pages isn't something that we could easily find within the regular GitHub runners, so we had to spin up our own self-hosted runners to do it. Another issue with dependabot is where you've got multiple dependencies to upgrade at the same time, and it doesn't seem to realize or can't currently figure out that these are all need to be merged at the same time, so it creates separate PRs that won't merge by themselves. So in terms of what we did for our self-hosted runners, we have two huge page enabled runners that are self-hosted internally within Intel, and they're within a VM, and within the VM they're running in a kind cluster. So there's kind of two levels of isolation between the runners and the actual Intel network. So yeah, Userspace CNI is quite difficult to get running. It definitely wouldn't run on a standard GitHub runner. So this one, we have a VM. We then have Docker kind containers, and we spin up and build the solution and deploy it within kind. And all of that is in the repo itself. So the CI, if people have a similar kind of requirement, can go off and look at our CI and see how we built it. And that's kind of it. That's all I have. Any questions? Okay. There's some links to some of the resources we needed for the project itself and how to set up the runners. Okay. Yeah.
You mentioned that it might be unmaintained soon again.
Yeah.
What do you think? Will it be less work to get it to a good score again now than when you took it over?
Well, at the moment, it's, the CI infrastructure had to be upgraded, right? It was on Ubuntu 22.04 and I had to go to 24.04 to maintain its score. That was probably the biggest upgrade. The rest of them are kind of dependabot bumps, right? And it is open source, so we would hope that, the community might look after it, but it is a bit of a niche, subject, user space networking. And yeah, so I don't know, to be honest. I mean, I could do it as a hobby in my spare time, but yeah, I think where it's at the moment, it's pretty easy to maintain. But as I said, it wasn't even building, and it didn't have any CI to actually test any of the changes when we initially started this. Thanks. Okay, thank you.